Howard Cosell, the name itself brings to mind a voice, a one-of-a-kind staccato, nasal drawl that cut right through the noise of the 20th century. It's the voice that gave us some of the most iconic calls in sports history. Down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier. He was, by his own admission, arrogant, pompous, obnoxious, vain, cruel, verbose, a show, and yet, for a whole generation of sports fans, he was appointment television. You loved him, you hated him, but you always listened. He was a lawyer, an intellectual, and a showman who forced America to see sports as more than just a game, but as a mirror to society itself. He stood by Muhammad Ali when the world turned its back. He gave a platform to athletes fighting for their rights. In so many ways, the man was a giant. But for millions, his entire legacy seems to hang on a single sentence. Just a handful of words spoken on a September night in 1983, during the biggest broadcast in the nation, Monday Night Football. It's a story that's been passed down for decades, hardening into what many believe is fact, that Howard Cosell made a racist comment about a black football player and was fired on the spot, his career ending in a blaze of shame. It's a simple, powerful story, the kind of story that makes for a neat morality tale. The arrogant broadcaster, finally getting what he deserved. But what if that story isn't true? What if the thing that everyone knows happened isn't what happened at all? We've all heard the story. Howard Cosell, live on Monday Night Football, sees a black player run and says, "Look at that little monkey run," and gets canned on the spot. But what if I told you that's not quite what he said, and that he definitely wasn't fired? What if the real story is far more complicated and reveals so much more about the man, the media, and the culture he dominated? Today, we're digging up the truth behind the little monkey controversy, separating myth from reality to understand what really happened to Howard Cosell's legendary career. The story will take us from the heights of journalistic courage to the depths of public outrage, and the answer to what truly ended his time in the spotlight is more complex and more tragic than you might think. To understand the explosion that happened in 1983, you first have to understand the man holding the match. Howard William Cohen, born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and raised in Brooklyn, was never going to be just another voice in the crowd. He was a brilliant student at New York University's School of Law, a man who seemed destined for a prestigious life behind a desk. He served his country, rising in the ranks of the U.S. Army during World War II. After the war, he built a successful law practice, even representing prominent athletes. By all accounts, he'd already made it, but there was a performer inside. That lawyer, a provocateur who couldn't be contained by legal briefs and courtroom rules. He was drawn to the world of sports, not just as a fan, but as a critic. He saw it as this grand theater of human drama, a subject that deserved to be taken seriously. In 1953, he got his first taste, hosting a local radio show for ABC, where kids got to ask questions to major league stars. It was a side gig he did for free, but the broadcasting bug had bit him. 3 years later, in a move that terrified his father, Howard Cosell quit his lucrative law practice, which was earning him nearly $30,000 a year, a fortune in the 50s for a 6-week $250 contract with ABC Radio. He had traded total security for a microphone. From the jump, he was different. Back then, sportscasting was a world of comfortable cliches. Announcers were mostly ex-jocks or gushing fans, their language soaked in hero worship. They were basically part of the PR machine. Howard Cosell showed up like a bomb thrown into a tea party. He didn't just tell you what happened. He told you why it happened, what it meant, and exactly what he thought about it. His style was wordy, analytical, and totally unafraid of a fight. He called it, telling it like it is. His critics, and there were legions of them, called it something else. They saw him as a pompous windbag, an outsider who had never played the game, a guy who made fun and games sound like, as one writer put it, the Nuremberg trials. But you couldn't deny his intelligence. He brought a lawyer's mind to the press box, dissecting plays and questioning motives. He refused to be a cheerleader. He insisted on being a journalist. This contrarian approach found its ultimate purpose in his relationship with a young boxer named Cassius Clay. As Clay rose through the ranks, most of the sports media treated him like a joke. They mocked his poetry and dismissed his boasts. Cosell, however, saw something more. He saw brilliance, charisma, and a cultural earthquake in the making. He gave Clay a platform, and their interviews became legendary, a verbal sparring match between two masters of language. And when Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali and joined the Nation of Islam, the establishment most broadcasters refused to call him by his new name. Cosell, however, was one of the first and most prominent media figures to call him Muhammad Ali, arguing it was his right. When Ali refused to be drafted for the Vietnam War, he was stripped of his title and exiled from boxing, becoming a pariah. But Howard Cosell stood by him, defending his convictions on national television and risking his own career to do it. He did the same for others. He supported John Carlos and Tommy Smith when they raised their fists at the 1968 Olympics, understanding it as a desperate plea for human rights. He gave Curt Flood a national stage to explain his fight against baseball's oppressive reserve clause, a system Flood compared to being a well-paid slave. Cosell wasn't just reporting on sports, he was reporting on America through sports. This history, this long and public record of defending black athletes, is the critical backdrop to the storm that was about to break. By 1970, Howard Cosell was already a star, but a BC executive, Roone Arledge, was about to turn him into a supernova. Arledge had a game-changing idea: turn pro football into primetime entertainment. He created Monday Night Football, and to anchor this new spectacle, he needed more than just a play-by-play guy. He needed a star. He needed Howard. Arledge built the broadcast booth around a combustible chemistry. He paired the controversial Cosell with the charming ex-quarterback dandy Don Meredith and the straight-laced Frank Gifford. The tension was the whole point. Meredith was the country boy who'd poke fun at Cosell's $50 words. Cosell was the city intellectual who would condescendingly explain the game to the jocks. Gifford was the calm center, just trying to keep the wheels on. It was an instant, staggering hit. Monday Night Football became a cultural institution. People tuned in not just for the game, but for the drama in the booth, to hear what outrageous thing Howard would say next. He was at the absolute peak of his fame. He was once voted both the most loved and most hated sportscaster in America. At the same time, a perfect summary of his power. But the pressure was immense, and the fame was a double-edged sword. Despite his abrasive persona, Cosell was a sensitive man. He read every bit of criticism, and the constant attacks wore him down. The drinking, which had always been a part of his life, sometimes got the better of him. On one infamous night in 1970, he was noticeably drunk on air, slurring his words before having to leave the broadcast after he threw up on Don Meredith's boots. It was a moment of public humiliation, a crack in the armor of the man who always seemed to be in control. As the years went by, his enthusiasm started to fade. He began to see pro football as, in his words, a stagnant bore, a product he was no longer excited to sell. He was tired of the travel, tired of the criticism, and tired of the game itself. The man who was once energized by controversy was now just being worn down by it. By the start of the 1983 season, Howard Cosell was a man at the top of his profession, but deeply sick of it. He was a giant, but he was a tired giant, and he was walking straight into a perfect storm. September 5, 1983, the opening night of the NFL season. The matchup was a blockbuster. The defending Super Bowl champion, Washington Redskins, versus their hated rivals, the Dallas Cowboys. The air at RFK Stadium was electric. This was more than a game. It was a primetime war. In the booth, the iconic trio of Cosell, Meredith, and Gifford were ready to go. The game was a slugfest, and one of Washington's unexpected heroes was a wide receiver named Alvin Garrett. At just 5'7", Garrett was an unlikely star. He was a quick, shifty player, part of a group of receivers the media had nicknamed the Smurfs, and he was having the game of his life. Late in the first half, Garrett snagged another pass and scurried for a crucial first down. As the broadcast went to a replay, Howard Cosell, in his trademark cadence, delivered the line that would define him forever. He said, "Joe Gibbs wanted to get this kid, and that little monkey gets loose, doesn't he?" In the booth, nothing happened. Don Meredith, maybe sensing the potential landmine, offered a slightly stilted reply. He certainly does, as a matter of fact, and the game moved on. To many viewers, it was probably just another weird Cosellism. But for others, those words landed like a gut punch. Comparing a black man to a monkey tapped into one of the oldest, ugliest racial slurs in the American vocabulary. The historical weight of that comparison was just immense. By the second half, the backlash was already starting. The switchboards at ABC were lighting up. Back in the booth, Cosell was apparently told what was happening during a commercial break. He came back on the air and, in a moment of defensive denial, made everything so much worse. He told the audience, according to the reporters, they were told that I called Alvin Garrett a little monkey. Nothing of the sort, and you fellows know it. That denial was a catastrophic mistake. The tape, of course, proved he had said it. By denying it, he looked like he was lying. The comment itself was the spark, but the clumsy denial was the gasoline. What was a controversial remark was now a full-blown scandal. The firestorm had begun. The next day, the story exploded. It was front-page news. The phrase "little monkey" was everywhere, stuck to Howard Cosell's name. The court of public opinion was in session, and it was furious. Leading the charge for Cosell's firing was the Reverend Joseph Lowery, president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Lowery called the remark racist and demanded a public apology in Cosell's termination. He argued this wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was a window into a prejudiced mindset that was unacceptable on national television. The media, sensing blood in the water, fanned the flames. Editorials were written, and call-in shows were consumed by the debate. Was Howard Cosell, the man who had championed Muhammad Ali for 2 decades, secretly a racist? Or was this a terrible, but innocent, mistake? Cosell himself was reportedly shocked and deeply hurt by the accusation. After his botched on-air denial, he had to admit he'd said the words. His defense came down to context and intent. He insisted that little monkey was not a racial slur in his vocabulary. It was, he claimed, a term of endearment he used for small, scrappy, energetic people, including his own grandchildren. To prove his point, his defenders and the network dug up prior examples, and they found them. There was a 1972 broadcast where Cosell described a white running back, Mike Adamill, who was also small and quick, by saying, "Look at that little monkey run." He'd also used the same term to describe the white baseball player, Glenn Hubbard. His argument was about consistency. If he used the term for white players and his own family, how could it be racist when applied to a black player? He argued the comment was about Garrett's size and elusiveness, not his race. He also found defenders in surprising places. The most powerful voice was Muhammad Ali himself, who stated flatly that he knew Cosell was not a racist. Civil rights leader Jesse Jackson also spoke out, saying he didn't believe there was racist intent. And then there was the man at the center of it all, Alvin Garrett. Garrett consistently maintained that he was not offended. Years later, he told a reporter, "I liked Howard Cosell. I didn't feel that it was a demeaning statement." He said the comment simply never bothered him, but in the heat of the national firestorm, that context got drowned out by the roar of outrage. For many, the history of the slur was just too powerful. The argument was that a man of Cosell's intelligence and media savvy should have known better. He should have understood that the word monkey, when directed at a black person by a white person on national TV, carried a payload of historical poison that no amount of personal explanation could diffuse. It was, at best, a colossal, unforgivable, blind spot. ABC issued a statement calling the remark unfortunate, but stood by their star. The damage, however, was done. The controversy clung to Cosell for the rest of the season. Every broadcast was scrutinized. The joy was gone, replaced by a cloud of suspicion and bitterness. And here, we arrive at the heart of the myth. The story that's been told for decades is that the little monkey comment was the end. That ABC, bowing to public pressure, fired Howard Cosell. It's a clean, dramatic ending to a legendary career. But that ending is pure fiction. Howard Cosell was not fired by ABC, not after the game, not after the season. He completed the entire 1983 Monday Night Football season, calling games week after week, while the controversy swirled. The decision to leave the broadcast booth was his, and his alone. In the spring of 1984, long after the season had ended, Howard Cosell announced he would not be returning to Monday Night Football. It was a voluntary resignation. Now, to say the controversy played no part would also be false. It was the final, crushing blow for a man who was already sick of the job. The incident had wounded him deeply. He felt betrayed by the press, which he believed had twisted his words and ignored his entire history. He was exhausted by the public anger. For Cosell, a man of immense ego, but also great sensitivity, being branded a racist was a devastatingly unfair accusation. The controversy became the focal point for all his frustrations. It confirmed his belief that the world of pro football had become a cesspool. In his book, I Never Played the Game, Cosell laid out his reasons for leaving. He talked about his weariness with the NFL and his frustration with his boothmates. The Alvin Garrett incident was the catalyst that pushed him out the door. The job just wasn't worth the aggravation anymore. So, the truth isn't a dramatic firing. It's a story of a slow, bitter disillusionment that ended in a voluntary exit. He wasn't pushed. He walked. He'd simply had enough. The myth of his firing is more dramatic, but the reality of his resignation is, in many ways, more tragic. Here's the other part of the story that dismantles the career-ending myth. What happened next? If Cosell's career was truly over, it would have ended in 1984, but at DIDN single quotes, T. After stepping away from Monday Night Football, Cosell remained a prominent employee at ABC. He immediately pivoted to a serious 30-minute sports journalism program called Sportsbeat. The show was pure Cosell, intelligent, investigative, and focused on the complex issues in sports. He later said it was his favorite show he ever worked on. It was critically acclaimed and was the work of a man still operating at the highest levels of network television. He continued to be a major presence for ABC Sports. He called boxing at the 1984 Summer Olympics. He hosted his popular Speaking of Sports radio show until his retirement in 1992. Cosell's final break with television wasn't caused by the little monkey comment. It was caused by his own pen. In 1985, he published his scathing memoir, Never Played the Game. In the book, he torched everyone. He disparaged his former colleagues, Frank Gifford and Don Meredith, ripped into ABC's leadership, and essentially burned every bridge he had ever built. The book was a sensation, but it was professional suicide. In response to the book's publication, ABC cancelled his beloved Sportsbeat show. That was the moment his television career effectively ended. Not because of a spontaneous comment in 1983, but because of a book published in 1985. It was his own words, written deliberately, that led to his final break with the network. He had always told it like it is, and in the end, he told it in a way that made it impossible for him to stay. After his wife Emmy died in 1990, he largely withdrew from public life, passing away in 1995. So, let's go back to the question that started all this. Did Howard Cosell get fired after he said that little monkey gets loose? The answer is an undeniable no. He wasn't fired. He finished the season and quit. His career didn't end. He worked in TV for years and on the radio for nearly a decade more. The myth persists because it's a simpler story. It gives us a clear case of crime and punishment. But the truth is infinitely more complex, and it tells us so much more about our culture. The story of Howard Cosell and Alvin Garrett is a story about language, and how the meaning of words can change based on who's speaking, who's listening, and the weight of history. It's a story about intent versus impact, and whether a lack of malice is enough to excuse a harmful result. Cosell's defenders point to his history, his past use of the phrase, and the support he got from people like Muhammad Ali and Alvin Garrett himself as proof of his innocence. His detractors argue that none of that matters. A public figure should have known better, and the word itself was just too poisoned by racist history to ever be okay. Ultimately, Howard Cosell's legacy can't be defined by this single incident, but it also can't be defined without it. He was a man of profound contradictions, a fierce advocate for racial justice who made a racially insensitive comment, a brilliant journalist whose ego often got in his own way, a man who stood on principle for his friends, but whose bitterness eventually led him to burn down his own career. He wasn't a simple hero or a simple villain. He was a complicated, flawed, brilliant giant who forced sports and America to look at itself in the mirror. The little monkey controversy wasn't the end of his career, but it was the beginning of the end of his love affair with the games he covered, and it remains a powerful lesson that the words we choose have a history all their own, and sometimes not even the most powerful voice in America can call them back. What do you think? Was the backlash against Cosell justified, or was he the victim of a misunderstanding that was blown out of proportion? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into the biggest stories in sports history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell.